My name is Rochelle, and I'm an African American who has been to over 11 African nations. And today, I'm going to be shedding a little bit of light onto why so many Black Americans are terrified to come to the continent. As an African American, I do believe that I have a little bit more context as to why some people in my community are scared to return to their African roots and scared to come to the continent. And I just wanted to share 6 key reasons as to why I believe Black Americans or African Americans, whatever they decide to label themselves, do not want to come to Africa or are very hesitant to come to Africa. So don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I hope you find this discourse knowledgeable. The number one reason I believe that so many Black Americans are hesitant to come to Africa is because of bad media and misinformation. Now, the first thing that I would like to talk about is the diaspora wars. Everybody in the Black community knows about the diaspora wars that happens online, or maybe even been a part of the diaspora wars yourself. And we know it can get real wicked and real sticky real fast, right? And for a lot of people, their phones are their main source of information. Unfortunately, many people around the world, especially people who may not have resources or the desire to travel, use their phone as the main source of information and their main source of intel. So what does that mean? That means that when someone sees the diaspora wars happening online, they use that as fact. They use that as facts to form their opinions about other people in other communities. And this can be a very dangerous thing to do because social media is not reality. Social media is not reality, but unfortunately, when all the diaspora wars happen online, there are a lot of people who don't have access to travel and they perceive social media as reality, which is one of the reasons why there is so much division in the Black community now. Diaspora wars are one of the biggest factors as to why so many Black Americans think that Africans hate them, or just Black people abroad hate them, or maybe Black people in the UK hate them, simply because of the diaspora wars online. Is it right? Is it accurate? No, but that is the reality. The diaspora wars are widening the gap in the Black community, and it's something that we really need to move past. Another factor is the bad media or the misinformed media that we were shown growing up as kids. As an African American, I vividly remember being about 6 or 7 and watching TV and watching advertisements from charity organizations showing Africans as destitute, starving, ashy, with flies flying around them, starving. That was the depiction that American media showed me at a very young age. That is a depiction of the impression that they were showing Black Americans and showing America in general. And those impressions were ingrained into our mentality at a very young age. Now, as I got older, I learned that those depictions of the charity organizations was not an accurate depiction of Africa. As I started my Pan-Africanism journey, I quickly learned that it is intentional. The powers that be intentionally misinform Black Americans of all the richness and all the resources that Africa has to offer. But unfortunately for a lot of us, we grew up from a very young age seeing Africa depicted as destitute, lacking, and poor. I do believe that that is an intentional factor of systemic racism to convince Black Americans that Africa has nothing to offer them. But as we are growing up and as we're educating ourselves, and as also Africans are educating us using the power of social media and the power of the internet, we are slowly starting to realize that Africa is not this destitute, starving place that the charity organizations or that American media showed us at a very early age. So that's why I list the number one reason as to why a lot of Black Americans are afraid to return to Africa as bad media and misinformed media. The second reason as to why I believe that Black Americans are avoiding coming to Africa is American exceptionalism, okay? About 40% of Americans own a passport as of now in 2024, which means that there's about 27 million Black Americans that do not have passports to even be able to leave the country. They may be lacking a passport due to socioeconomic reasons and lack of resources, or they may just be lacking a passport due to a lack of desire to leave the United States. In fairness, the United States is huge. You could travel throughout the United States your whole life and still not even see everything that it has to offer. So if someone didn't have a desire to leave the United States, they don't really have to. The United States is extremely diverse, it is very large, and it has a lot to offer. And that does tie into the factor of why a lot of Americans just don't see a desire, don't see a need to get a passport and to leave the country and to explore other cultures, especially Africa. Unfortunately, this is just the reality of a lot of Americans. They were fed propaganda to believe that the United States is one of the greatest nations in the world. The United States is the so-all be-all, and it has everything that they could ever need. And that is one of the reasons that tie into why 27 million Black Americans do not have a passport and genuinely don't even have a desire to leave the United States. The next point that I'm going to talk about is a little bit of a touchy subject, and it is a little bit controversial, but I'm going to be talking about the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is a phenomenon where someone is reluctant to abandon a course of action because they feel like they have invested too much time, or their ancestors have invested too much time onto a specific plan. And I feel like this is a conversation that has been ongoing in the Black American community. A lot of Black Americans feel like they have to stay in the United States because their ancestors built the United States. And they feel like leaving the United States, whether it may be visiting Africa for some time or moving to Africa, would almost be like a betrayal to our ancestors, like a slap in the face to our ancestors. But I'm here to tell you that it's not. I personally believe that at the end of the day, our ancestors want us to heal. Many Black Americans believe that since our ancestors built the United States, it is their duty to stay in the United States and continue to fight for equality or equity or reparations or some type of restitution. And I'm not saying that that is the wrong mentality, because we are 100% owed reparations, but I also believe that it is our responsibility to move forward and heal wherever that may be in the world, however that may look to you on your personal journey. For some people, repatriating to Africa or even moving abroad to other countries is their way of moving forward. It is their reparations, because at the end of the day, they're able to heal and gain a new sense of peace that they would not be allowed in the United States. For some people, they choose to stay in the United States and fight for equality and continue the fight that we've been fighting for the last 400 years, and that is their personal choice. But I'm just listing this as one of the reasons why a lot of Black Americans choose to stay in the United States. They are demanding reparations. They are demanding justice. They are demanding restitution for the hundreds of years of torture and disparities that our ancestors and that our people are currently going through. And that is their personal choice. I'm not here to say whether it's right or wrong, but I do believe that we have to find a way to move forward, however that looks to you. If moving forward means staying in the United States and continuing to fight the fight of equality, trying to get basic human rights, trying to get reparations that's owed to us, that's your personal choice. But for a lot of us, moving forward also means repatriating to Africa and starting anew and reconnecting with our African roots. But this is one of the big reasons why some Black Americans have no desire to leave. They are not leaving until they get their reparations, and some of us do have a sunk cost fallacy. We believe that we have invested way too much into the United States to just leave when it seems like we're on the precipice of possibly getting reparations. Many Black American revolutionaries have moved abroad and have raved about their amazing experiences moving abroad and finding peace abroad. It is a very personal decision, but Maya Angelou has raved about her experiences living in Africa. Nina Simone, James Baldwin. There are so many African American revolutionaries that have found peace abroad, and I do wish that it was something that the Black community would at least consider. just at least consider. But it's a personal choice at the end of the day. Another big reason as to why some Black Americans are hesitant to return to Africa is due to lack of trusted resources and lack of trusted information. There are a lot of Black Americans that view Africa as poverty, destitution, corruption, and scams. This may be due to other Black Americans who have unsuccessfully repatriated to the Africa, to the continent, or it may be due to false information and propaganda by the American media system. However, this is the impression that some Black Americans have about Africa. They're scared to come to Africa because they've heard about the corruption, they've heard about the scams, they've heard about people losing thousands of dollars trying to repatriate to Africa and being scammed out of all their money. These are the stories that people are telling back home. You know, when someone unsuccessfully repatriates to Africa, they go back home and they tell everybody about their experience. And it does make other Black Americans or African Americans hesitant. I've had people tell me this personally, like, oh, I was thinking about going to West Africa, but I just don't know. Like my homegirl, you know, she tried and they scammed her out of every cent that she had. She had to run back to the United States, you know? So this is something that requires accountability on both sides. I do think that it is important for Black Americans to avoid romanticizing Africa. I believe in Pan Africanism without the romanticism. Okay. You have to stay grounded and you have to stay sensible so you're not susceptible to scams and corruption. But also on the flip side, Africans have to understand that you have to avoid taking advantage of people that are trying to reconnect with their indigenous roots. The diaspora was separated from their indigenous roots nearly 500 years ago. And in order for the Black community to move forward, we have to stop taking advantage of the diaspora that is trying to reconnect with their indigenous roots. So, like I said, accountability is needed on both sides. Another reason why some Black Americans just simply don't want to come to Africa is due to a lack of tourism marketing from African countries. I do understand that a lot of African countries have bigger priorities than tourism marketing, right? However, I do think that it could greatly benefit the continent and greatly reduce the gap in the Black community if Africa took tourism marketing a little bit more seriously. Because, for example, I went to Malawi for the first time this year, and Malawi is a gorgeous, breathtaking country in Southeast Africa that has so much to offer and has so much potential when it comes to tourism. And I do believe that it is completely underrated when it comes to tourism. However, the tourism marketing department, maybe they are lacking resources, or maybe they just simply don't make it a priority to advertise the tourism market. But there's so much undiscovered potential in Malawi. And there's so many other countries throughout Africa that could greatly benefit from tourism if the tourism marketing department just took it a little bit more seriously. I do believe that one reason that a lot of Black Americans are misinformed about Africa is because the African countries, are simply not advertising all the beauty that it has to offer, especially to the Western market, to where Black Americans are. Okay, so the last and final reason that I have, which is also something that I had to hold myself accountable for, is simply the failure to prioritize travel in Africa. This is something that I was guilty of because I've been traveling for nearly 13 years. I've been living abroad for nearly 13 years. I lived in Europe for 3 years. I lived in Latin America for 4 years. I even lived in Southeast Asia. I am an avid traveler. I have traveled high and low, left to right, east, west. I love traveling, but I personally had to hold myself accountable because after nearly 11 years of traveling, I had never been to Africa. And personally, I believe that the reason is due to us being in the West, we are naturally drawn to travel influencers who prioritize Western countries, who prioritize Latin countries, who prioritize high tech countries such as Tokyo or even South Korea, Japan and South Korea. And it just seems like There's always some new country that's popping up in the travel industry that piques our interest, and we always just overlook Africa. We do have a bad habit of overlooking Africa and underestimating Africa and underestimating the beauty and the fun and the adventure that we could be partaking in Africa. And like I said, a lot of us prioritize Tokyo, Japan, Bali, Amsterdam, Paris, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia. These are all places that I've been, right? But we always seem to overlook Africa. And it is something that we have to hold ourselves accountable for. We do have to make a conscious decision to prioritize Africa, even when the travel industry is pushing all these other countries in our face. Like the travel industry is always going to push high tech countries in our face or Western countries in our face. But that doesn't mean that we still can't prioritize Africa. So I do believe that that is the last and final reason why some Black Americans just don't want to come to Africa. There's so many other travel destinations that are being pushed in our face by Western media. We just often tend to overlook Africa or underestimate Africa. And another thing that I used to do is use the cost of the flights as an excuse. That's no longer an excuse, guys. Okay. And this is another thing that I had to hold myself accountable for. I had to sit and think to myself, if I can travel from Thailand to Brazil, which is like, it was a $1,300 flight, literally almost 40 hours of travel, I have no excuse as to why I'm not visiting Africa. I really had to sit and think about that. Like, I keep using the cost of the flights to Africa as an excuse, but I have no problem traveling from Asia to South America. I have no problem traveling from South America to Mexico, to North America. I have no problem traveling from New York City to Colombia, but I keep using the flights or the distance to Africa as an excuse. We need to stop using that as an excuse because if you really think about it, it's not an excuse. Okay, especially when flights to Tokyo are over $2,000 and flights to South Africa are probably about $900. Is it still expensive? Yes, but it's half the price as Tokyo. But you'll buy that ticket to Tokyo in a hot second. Why aren't you buying a ticket to the continent? Okay, so we have to hold ourselves accountable for underestimating Africa and skipping over Africa because it is a common thing, I think, in America, especially in the Black American community. So I hope you found this knowledgeable or maybe shedding a little bit of light as to why some Black Americans are afraid to come to Africa or why they're just avoiding Africa. Of course, you can't generalize an entire group of people. This only applies to some, not all, but I hope you enjoyed this content. Comment below. What are your thoughts? Do you agree? Do you disagree?